You're listening to The Voluntary Life, where you can hear ideas for finding freedom in an unfree world. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to connect with the show and hear all past episodes. Here's your host, Jake.
Hi, it's Jake here. Welcome to The Voluntary Life. In this episode, I'm sharing a chapter from my book, Becoming an Entrepreneur. I wrote Becoming an Entrepreneur to share everything that I learned in founding, growing, and selling a business. And in this episode, I'm sharing chapter 1 of the book, which is called Breaking Free. It comes after the introduction, in which I talk about my own background and my personal story in setting up a business, and I've shared that introduction in a previous episode of The Voluntary Life, but this is chapter 1, just to give you a taste of the book. If you'd like to read this book, you can get it on Amazon as an ebook and a paperback, and if you'd prefer to listen to it as an audiobook, you can get the audiobook on audible.com, and if you want to listen to the audiobook, you can get it for free on Audible if you sign up for the 30-day trial using my referral link, which I'll put in the show notes. I've been a member of Audible for over 10 years, and I think it's a great service. So if you sign up for that trial, you can get the book, and even if you don't want to continue afterwards, you get to keep it. So before we get on to the chapter from my book, I just want to say a big thank you to my new patrons on Patreon. They are James T. and Richard C. Patrons are supporting listeners who make the Voluntary Life podcast possible, and in return, patrons get bonus episodes and many other rewards. In fact, one of the rewards that is particularly relevant for this episode is that if you sign up to become a patron at the Financial Freedom Builder or Voluntary Lifer level of support, then you can get both my books in audiobook format as a reward. So that's another way that you can get hold of this book and support the Voluntary Life at the same time. If you are a long-term listener, please consider becoming a patron of the show. And if you'd like to find out more, you can click on the link that I'll put in the show notes, which you can access directly on your podcast player, or go to my website, thevoluntarylife.com, or directly to my Patreon page, which is at patreon.com/thevoluntarylife. So without further delay, here's an excerpt from my book, Becoming an Entrepreneur. Chapter 1. Breaking Free. Perfect freedom is reserved for the man who lives by his own work and, in that work, does what he wants to do. R.G. Collingwood. Entrepreneurship provides the best opportunity for anyone to experience the 3 most fulfilling, intrinsic motivations in life: purpose, mastery, and autonomy. Purpose is the motivation that comes from having an important reason for whatever you do. It is a conviction that what you're doing matters. Your work means something significant to you. You have the satisfaction of knowing that you're doing something useful with your life and that your work has value in the world. Mastery is the motivation that comes from a desire to achieve a high level of skill, control, and self-expression through what you do. It is the sense that you're involved in work that enables you to gain a greater sense of effectiveness and consequently greater self-esteem. Everything you do when starting your own business is a chance at mastery. The entrepreneurial skills that I found hardest to master were also those that became the most rewarding: learning how to sell, learning how to create a working enterprise, and learning how to make a profit. Autonomy is the motivation that comes from wanting the freedom to do what you think is best with your life, not what anyone else thinks. Entrepreneurship is the only opportunity to seek financial freedom, the freedom not to work on anything you don't enjoy, that is open to anyone. This is the most genuine sense of freedom that you can experience. As an entrepreneur, you alone determine your goals. You have the opportunity to master your own challenges. You have the maximum freedom possible in what you do. Your own efforts lead to your own achievements and rewards. Entrepreneurship is the opportunity to live a purposeful life without regrets. It is the freest and most fulfilling way of life I know. Self-liberation for everyone. This is a program for self-liberation available to everyone. You do not have to have a particular personality type to succeed in creating your own business. There are successful introvert entrepreneurs as well as extroverts. There are those who prefer to persuade, as well as those who like to direct. There are detail-oriented people, as well as those who are best at seeing the big picture. Each person can create a business in his or her own way. Customers don't care which school you went to or which exams you passed. They don't care about the race, gender, or sexual orientation of the entrepreneur behind a business. They simply care about whether your product is useful to them. There is no limit to the number of people who can start their own business at any one time. It's not as if there are only so many entrepreneur jobs available. Humans will never run out of unfulfilled needs for businesses to meet, so anyone can invent a business that will be relevant to some market. We could live in a world of entrepreneurs. Everyone could work for themselves in a vast network of independent contractors. Perhaps we are moving towards that possible future. I believe we would all be far happier and more responsible for it. Everyone would gain an understanding of basic economics and the importance of reciprocity. The world could be unimaginably more peaceful and prosperous as a result. The opportunity to start your own business is one of the great privileges of our times. I'm thankful that I was born in this period of great business creativity and development after the Industrial Revolution, and not during the vast majority of earlier history when most entrepreneurs were killed for upsetting the existing order. It's up to us to take advantage of the possibilities that this time offers. Even within my lifetime, technological change has made it far easier to become an entrepreneur. It is now feasible to start your own business over the weekend and have access to a truly global market on Monday. The technology available to us would have astonished any entrepreneur working even one generation ago. We have frictionless access to any customer or supplier on Earth through the internet. We can use crowdfunding to raise money without being beholden to powerful institutions. We have real-time reporting systems that show how our businesses are performing. We can use a huge selection of cheap automation tools to scale our businesses easily. What holds people back? Here is a strange contradiction of our times. Although it has never been easier to be an entrepreneur, nearly everyone is trained to become an employee. Most people are indoctrinated from an early age to imagine that the only realistic option for supporting themselves is getting a job. They learn to think like worker drones and to spend their lives following directions from someone else. It's a kind of employee conditioning. Most people become so indoctrinated that they assume, by default, that they need to get a job from an employer in order to make a living. As children, they were taught that passing exams, obtaining certification from someone else, is the key to finding a good job. In contrast, when you start a business, you create opportunities for yourself and others by finding new ways to be helpful. Employee conditioning creates the mentality of followers. The default assumption is that somebody else makes the big decisions and your job is to follow them. However, as an entrepreneur, you are your own leader. You have the exciting opportunity to provide a defining purpose for your ventures. Most people have been trained to look to authority figures for rewards. They look to bosses to give them a promotion, just as they were trained as children to look to teachers for grades and to parents for approval. In contrast, an entrepreneur looks for reciprocation from customers as equals for value provided. When you think like an employee, you expect someone else to be the judge of your own progress. Your boss gets to decide how you're doing, and you work to influence his perception. In contrast, if you create a business, you take responsibility to assess how you are doing. Employee conditioning shelters you from many of the important questions facing a business owner, such as how to finance a venture. When you are trained to think like an employee, you focus on office politics and miss out on the really interesting decisions facing the business. Most people have no idea about the options available to finance a business and the advantages or disadvantages of each option. I certainly didn't know about such things. As employees, people think they need to take on more and more responsibility in the work process in order to secure their jobs. Many entrepreneurs are also held back by the conditioning that leads them to take on ever more responsibility. Despite financial success, business owners often suffer from stress and burnout because their businesses depend on their input for so many aspects of day-to-day operations. I will suggest a completely different approach. As a business owner, the most valuable work that you can do is to design workflows. The quicker you extract yourself from active involvement in these workflows, the better it will be for you and your business. The employee mentality teaches a goal of finding work and hanging on to it, but your goal as an entrepreneur is to create value and make yourself obsolete in the process. It's a wonderful opportunity to change the way you work. Employee conditioning trains us to judge and justify our work by effort and intention. We become involved in intricate hierarchical games whereby employers try to influence our behavior and we try to beat the system. When you start your own business, you judge everything by results because that's what matters. You do things to make a real impact, not because other people want you to. As an employee, you are trained to avoid risking failure at the cost of never doing anything extraordinary. Starting a business requires you to risk failure in order to achieve something truly remarkable. Why it's hard. The main reason people find starting a business scary and confusing is that they've been conditioned in their most formative years to think of themselves as employees. Children are natural entrepreneurs. They have a restless curiosity and creativity. Employees are not born, they are made by years of indoctrination. The most obvious source of employee conditioning is school, where we spend over a decade being prepared for the workplace. The whole point of modern compulsory schooling, as it has evolved since its invention in 19th century Prussia, is to make employees out of kids. Some educational luminaries have expressed this quite explicitly. John Dewey wrote, "Every teacher should realize he is a social servant set apart for the maintenance of the proper social order and the securing of the right social growth." The purpose of schooling is often unclear even to many people working within it. School is a factory for the production of employees. Even the teachers have been conditioned by it. Every single school teacher you ever had was an employee. Is it any wonder that they taught you to think like one? School is a kind of prison for kids, and we are all ex-cons trying to find our way in the world outside. School did not just leave us unprepared for starting a business, it made us less capable because it trained us to think like employees. If sitting in rows for years at school impressed anything upon us, it was how to think like followers. The person who mattered was the one dispensing knowledge at the front of the class. We were only there to absorb teachings from the leader and to try to gain their favor. A less obvious source of employee conditioning is the family. The model of being an employee and having a boss is very familiar to many people because most parents behave like the bosses of their children, and crappy bosses to boot. They use punishment and rewards to get their kids to comply, rather than cultivating a relationship based on negotiation with them. This kind of parenting treats children more like pets to be trained than like individuals whose preferences are respected. Compliance-oriented parenting leaves people with a deeply hierarchical view of relationships. We learn to take it for granted that someone in charge gives out the orders and everyone else has to comply. This limits our view as adults of what working life can be. We go from one hierarchical job to another, hoping to move up the career ladder, often blind to the opportunity of a life outside the job hierarchy as a business owner. I hope that someday compulsory schooling, that hangover from the 19th century, will end. More people will realize how completely outdated the idea of forced schooling is for the world that we now live in. I also hope that there will come a time when the general standard of parenting improves to the point at which children are treated as vulnerable individuals to be negotiated with, rather than as underlings whose job is to comply. However, those of us born before such a time have to unlearn our conditioning in order to be free. Today, it is feasible for anyone who wants to become an entrepreneur to do so. We've just been trained not to try. The employee mindset significantly lags behind the opportunities available today. It's long overdue that we leave our employee conditioning behind. It's amazing how much more joy and fulfillment you can have when you stop thinking like an employee and free yourself to act as an entrepreneur. Breaking free. Some people choose to find comfort in what is familiar to them. If you want to work in jobs, then the employee conditioning that you received might suit you. You can spend your whole life doing that if you'd like. The problem is this: if you do want to create your own business, this conditioning imprisons your creativity and convinces you that there is no escape from your jobbing lifestyle. I believe that if we weren't all trained to think of ourselves as employees, then nobody these days would want to be one. There is too much fun and fulfillment to be had as an entrepreneur. Almost everyone who starts their own business has a range of learned prejudices, preoccupations, and bad habits that sabotage their own success. I certainly had mine, as you will hear throughout this audiobook. Starting a business pits you against all the messages inside your head that hold you back in life. This is the psychological challenge of entrepreneurship. When you free yourself of this conditioning, you free yourself in life and you gain fulfillment as an entrepreneur. The employee mentality is an unhealthy state of mind. It leads you to think that your locus of control is outside yourself. It encourages you to look to others to tell you what to do and think. The fact that this way of thinking is the norm is a sign of how indoctrinated most people are at present. In contrast, entrepreneurship requires critical thinking expressed in creative action. As Michelangelo put it, you criticize by creating. To think like a successful entrepreneur, you simply need to think as a rational individual does. Learning to be an entrepreneur is about unlearning your employee conditioning so that you can think freely again. This audiobook will help you dump your employee conditioning, free yourself to take action as an entrepreneur, and have a great time in the process. Work takes up a huge proportion of our time, energy, and life. It's far too important to leave it to someone else to decide what your best work can be. If you're willing to take the risk and responsibility of starting your own business, you will have the freedom to do the work that you choose in the way that you want. If you know deep down that you'd find this choice more fulfilling, despite how scary or challenging it might seem, then listen on. I'm going to help you stage a prison break.
Thank you for listening to The Voluntary Life. If you like this podcast, please show your support by becoming a patron of The Voluntary Life on Patreon. Your support will help to grow and improve the show, and you'll get access to a treasure trove of rewards, including bonus episodes. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to learn more.